Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Right? Yesterday, today, and forever. Always the same. He's so faithful. So good. Well, before I introduce Pastor Pete, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about this process. So back in December, when Pastor Caleb tendered his resignation, Jason and John were kind enough to reach out to me and invite me to be part of the process and help them find a new pastor. And that goes back, for those of you who don't know, by the way, I'm Pastor Joe, founding pastor at Life Center. And in 2009, it was Life Center that sent City Church out. We were the sending church for City Church. And so Jason and John asked me if I would help them with this process. Right away, I found out that Pete Copeland was interested in becoming your pastor. And I've known Pete for quite a while, and I thought, well, how awesome is that? I have great respect for Pete, and I thought that'd be cool if that works out. So we started the process, and I met with Pete, Jason, and John, and I met how many times? A bunch. And yeah, we met pretty regularly and talked through the process. I sent some emails out. I have some nice circles of contacts after being a pastor here in the community for 44 years and leading a bunch of pastors groups. And so I sent some emails out and got some interest back from some churches who wanted to merge, churches that didn't have buildings and would love to have yours. And I don't mean that unkindly, but I mean, that was part of the attraction, right? Was, hey, we need a place to meet, and you've got a place to meet. Maybe we could merge our churches. And we looked at that, but we really felt like City Church is a family, and you have, and every family has a personality, doesn't it? And you have that, and we just felt like if we needed to merge, we would. But if we can keep this family intact and find a new pastor, that was our first choice. And so as things progressed along, it really became clear that Pete was not just the first candidate, but also the best candidate. And we had an interview with Pete and his wife Becky and the leadership team a few weeks ago. And it's right over here in the, what do you call that room? The Commons, all right? Yep. We were there. We had a nice dinner, had fun talking. And in that meeting and in several meetings prior to that, there were some things that happened that I just looked at and I thought, this is the hand of God. God in his goodness is taking care of us. Aren't you grateful for that? And I found out that before Caleb had even resigned, God had spoken to Pete and Becky, particularly to Becky. It's usually the case. The wife here is better than the husband. Yeah. And so kudos to you ladies. But yeah, God had spoken to Becky that Pete was going to be the next pastor of City Church. This is before Caleb resigned. This is while Pete was still pastoring Downriver Church. And his wife's getting a word from the Lord that he's going to pastor City Church. I mean, that is unusual, is it not? And then members here also, before Caleb resigned, got a sense from the Lord that Pete was going to be our next pastor. And there were just things along the way, like those kind of signposts where you're going, that doesn't happen. And after the meeting, there was such a sweet spirit of unity and unanimity among everyone. Everyone felt the same way. I drove home. I called my wife immediately. I was so excited. And I said, I've done dozens of these transitions over the last 44 years. And I cannot remember one where I felt the hand of the Lord so clearly as this one. And that gives me real encouragement, doesn't it you? I mean, I feel like, man, God's in this. And I am very, very excited for Pete and Becky. And I'm very, very excited for City Church to see what God is going to do. I believe our best days are ahead of us, don't you? So tonight I'm just introducing Pete. He's going to preach. And in 2 weeks from tonight, we will do an official installation service where, I'm going to give him a biblical charge, drop the hammer, and yes, sir. And then when I'm done with him, then I start on you. So yeah, don't be too happy. No, it'll be great. It'll be a fun installation service, and Pete's already officially begun, just so you know. March 1st was his first day. And so he is our new pastor. I'm very excited about that. And as I said, 2 weeks we'll do that official installation. So anyway, if you have any questions about any of that, I'll be hanging around afterwards. Feel free to ask me. But right now, I want you to give a great big cheer for your new pastor, Pastor Pete.
That's twice in 2 months that Joe has introduced me, and I need to figure out how much he charges because it's good every time. Every time. I want Joe to be the guy that goes around and introduces me everywhere. I know. My wife can, and that's what's good. I just wanted to open up tonight. There's a specific word that's kind of been with me throughout this whole process, and it's culminated to tonight, and that word is honor. I feel really honored in this process, and so I wanted to start by saying thank you. That word, it's funny, and I'm going to tell you about a few little, we'll call them coincidences. If you don't believe in coincidences, then we'll call them just kind of the fingerprints of God on this whole thing and the way that I've seen it. But all the way back to probably 12, 13, 14 years ago, I remember that I was in a Willow Creek Leadership Summit at Life Center. Life Center hosts those locally. Anybody ever been to those? So if you haven't, they're leadership summits, not just for church people. They're led by church people, but there's a lot of business people that are part of that. And I was thinking about the timeline, and I thought it may have actually even been the same year that City Church was launched from Life Center. And I was thinking about it because Craig Groeschel was speaking that day. And if you're not familiar with who Craig Groeschel is, he pastors what is probably still the largest church in America, one of, if not the largest, 40,000 people pre-COVID, roughly 30 campuses, just a giant church. If you have a Bible app on your phone, you probably are familiar with his church, Life Church, because they didn't write the Bible, but they wrote the app. And that first app that many of us have had came from Life Church. And so I remember listening to Craig Groeschel speak that night, and he was speaking about succession planning. He was speaking about transitions and how sometimes, especially in the church world, it's difficult, but really in any environment, it's difficult to hand off. And he talked about older pastors and younger pastors, older leaders and younger leaders. How sometimes if you're younger, you look at the people above you and you're like, they were good, but they had their time, and now it's my time. And you see the way that they do stuff, and you resent them a little bit. And also, when you're older, and I'm experiencing that now as I look at the next generation coming up, I go, I don't get it. I don't understand you, the words that you say and the way that you lead. But what I remember about that specific leadership summit and that keynote that Craig Groeschel gave is he said a phrase, and it's stuck with me ever since, because in every world, in every leadership situation, you're going to work with people that don't think like you, that don't look like you, that don't act like you, that don't lead like you. And the phrase that he said was, respect is earned, honor is given. Respect is earned, honor is given. I say it twice because that's what Craig Groeschel does every single time that he makes a point. Respect is earned, honor is given. And I thought about in this process, there was really no reason for anybody to show me honor. But you did. From dealing with Jason and with John, with the leadership team here, Becky and I have just felt an overwhelming sense of honor. It really wasn't anything that we had done because, frankly, we didn't know a lot of you, and I still don't know a lot of you, and I'm looking forward to being able to meet some of you. But I just wanted to start by saying thank you, because I feel unbelievably honored to be able to step into this role, to have the privilege of leading this family in the direction that God wants us to go. I feel a little bit, though, like a stepdad coming into a family. It's a family that already exists. It's a community that already exists. And so my job right now is just to listen and to learn and to get to know you guys better. So that's my goal. That's my next, few months is just to hang out, to get to know one another, and then to come together to listen and talk about where do we want to go as we move forward. So that's one interesting thing in this whole thing, that I kept thinking about this theme of honor and how really that seed was planted at Life Center, the same place that City Church came from. And you may have heard me speak last time about some of those connections that I have with different leaders in my life. But that's not the only thing. And we are going to dive into Matthew chapter 5 in a minute. But I wanted to share just a couple more things with you before we do that. first, when Jason came to me and said, hey, would you be willing to speak on March 6th? It was before we even had an interview scheduled. So we were in process, we were talking about things, and we all kind of had this idea of how things were going to go, but there was nothing on the calendar. There was no assurances that after today, I would be in this role. But I wanted to do what God wanted me to do. And when my church closed last October, I really felt God saying, during this next season, just say yes. Just help out wherever you can help out. And so, we knew we were going that direction, but Jason said, could you speak that week? And I said yes. And then I thought it was another little hand of God thing here. I said, what do you want me to speak on? And thankfully he didn't say just whatever you want, because I hate that. But he said, well, we're going to be in this series in the Beatitudes. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because the last series that I preached at Downriver before we took a couple weeks to shut down, we went through the Beatitudes. And so this was something that was fresh on my mind. It's something that I've studied recently. And I have to say, we did it a little bit differently. We did one verse a week because I am not the pastor that Joe is. He can cram 2 verses each week into it. I'm going to give it a shot today, but I'll tell you that if I am watching the clock, and if we get too long, then next week we'll talk about the second of these 2 verses. But I just thought it was a gracious thing for God to be able to do, to say, hey, here's something that we're going to start you with something easy. We're going to dump you into the middle of this thing, and you're going to go here. So I thought that was really cool. And so what I did, I listened to Joe open this series 2 weeks ago, talking about how to be happy, these red letters of Jesus, what kind of things we can do to have a happy life. And so I listened to Joe, and then last week I listened to Jason talk because I was out of town. And then I thought I probably should go back and listen to my own sermon, the one that I preached about 7 or 8 months ago. And this last little coincidence, this last little interesting fingerprint of God popped up, because all the sermons from Downriver Church, they're on YouTube. And so I went back and I found the one and I started listening, and I fast forwarded through the boring stuff, which was me at the beginning. But then I got right as to where I thought the sermon was starting, and it wasn't where the sermon was starting, but something caught my attention. I was giving an announcement about this building that we had just entered into a purchase agreement on. We were at the place where we were buying a building, and we were in feasibility. The deal was signed around, and we had architects come in and contractors come in and tell us, is this something that we could really do? And I remember that the contractor said, because I said, well, how can we save some money in this? We have some really capable people. And he said, if you could find a team of people who could come alongside of you, like I could point and you guys can swing sledgehammers and do demolition and that kind of stuff. And so I went that week to my pastor's meeting, which Jason was a part of, and we were sharing kind of prayer requests and what was going on in our lives. And they said, well, how's this building process going? And I said, it's going really well, but I really need a group of people who would be willing to come in and swing some hammers, do some demolition. And Jason was the first. He goes, oh, we'll do that. City Church, we'll help you guys out with that. And we say those things as pastors sometimes, if I'm being completely honest, and we intend to help, but help doesn't always manifest. But I said, thank you. And some of the other guys said, yeah, just let us know how we can help. And we prayed and we finished our meeting, and Jason pulled me aside. He said, hey, I was serious. That wasn't lip service. We have a community of people here at City Church who would love to help. We love swinging hammers and breaking things down. So I don't know what that says about you. I'll learn that as we go. But it was an amazing thing to turn on that video and to hear the congregation that I was leading at the time clapping and celebrating that there was this other church in town that was willing to partner, that it wasn't about a silo of who we are as a church and who they are as a church. There's this other group of people who didn't know us, and they were like, we'll help you with whatever. And that was you guys. And so you can see how I've just felt an unbelievable sense of honor in this whole thing. And I've seen God's hand again and again and again. And I'm just unbelievably thankful for this opportunity. I do, though, want to honor where you guys have been, and I want to continue through this series. We're not going to start a new series for a few weeks. We're going to finish out the Beatitudes, and Jason and I and John this week will begin talking kind of about where we want to go next. And I've already heard from some people, here's a topic that maybe we could talk about. But I want to honor where we've been as a church, and like I said, I want to listen and I want to learn, and I don't want to change things up. So we are going to dive right back into the Beatitudes today. And we're going to start with Matthew 5, verse 7. And it's going to be on the screen. A really simple verse, like most of these Beatitudes are. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. I have to tell you, when I think of mercy, one specific thing comes to mind. You know what it is? It's the game. Yeah, it's the game that you played. Anyone ever play Mercy? For those of you who've never played it, you find somebody, hopefully not as strong as you, and you line up and you go palm to palm with them, and you just, if you're feeling really bad, you look them right in the eyes, you stare them down, and maybe if you have bad breath, and you blow it in their direction. You interlock your fingers, and then you do your best to bend their hands all the way back so that their knuckles touch their elbows. Like, try to expose bones and ligaments. Like, it's something that you do in like middle school or elementary school. And I used to love playing Mercy. I grew up, I was a pretty athletic kid, and I was pretty strong. When I was in fourth grade, I started drumming. And so I actually, right now I have normal 44-year-old man forearms, but I had these same forearms when I was 9 years old. If you ask my wife, she'll tell you they're the sexiest thing about me, and I don't know what that says about me, but I've had these for a long time. They're normal now. Yeah, we're way off the rails. This is week 1, guys. Like, this is the direction that we're going together, and I'm okay with it if you are. But I remember playing this game of Mercy, and I remember being really good at it. And I love to play it because there's this sense of like dominance and power, and I don't know what that says psychologically about me. But I liked to do that. I grew up, I became a wrestler. I got into Brazilian jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts. And so I've been around like the cage fighting scene kind of my whole life. I have friends who fight in the UFC, and I got to be kind of an older mentor for some of those guys as they were coming up. And it's something that it's something that I love. But that's what I think about when I think about mercy. And so I go, well, blessed are the merciful. Like, what does that really mean? What does that say about me? If that's the first thing that comes to mind, it's not a very Christian thought, right? To think about dominating somebody else. But I think there's an element of the definition and the value of mercy that comes into play that's appropriate for our conversation today, because how you win the game of mercy is when you're bending their hands back and somebody gives up. They cry out for mercy. They say, mercy, mercy, mercy. And now you in a position of power, well, you have to stop. Well, you don't have to stop, but you're supposed to stop. Because what they're doing is they're saying, I'm in this position where I'm vulnerable. And there's nothing that I can do in this place to be able to protect myself from something that I willfully walked into, that I chose to engage in. And so I need you to show me mercy. When we think about mercy in the Christian context, in the context of anybody who's been in the church for any length of time, we often conflate mercy and grace. And they're related things, but it's important that we understand the difference because one helps us better understand the other. And so there's a whole lot more theological nuance to this whole thing, but a simple way to understand what grace is grace is when you get something good that you didn't deserve. And usually it's given to you from somebody who's in a position of power above you, right? It's not somebody underneath of you who's going here, like they're trying to satisfy you. They're trying to get into your good graces. Grace is usually when you get something good from somebody, something you don't deserve, and that person really there's no benefit for them giving it to you. Mercy is similar, but it's different. Mercy is when you don't get something bad that you do deserve, usually from somebody in a position of power, or somebody who has the authority to say, you have wronged me in one way or another. You've offended me. You've caused me some sort of great pain. And they actually own the right to be able to come back and exact revenge or retribution or consequence or discipline or punishment in some way. So grace is when we get something good that we didn't earn or we don't deserve. Mercy is when we don't get something that we do deserve. But inside of salvation and inside of our faith, our relationship with Jesus, like I said, one really informs the other. Because we can't fully understand grace unless we understand mercy. We can't fully understand this great gift, this free gift of salvation that God has given to us, unless we understand what God has saved us from. So grace helps us understand mercy, and we understand mercy because we understand sin. We understand who we are, what we've done, and how we fall short of what God has for us. So we see that God protects us from the punishment that we've rightfully earned with mercy. And mercy comes because God is a gracious God, because he's given us this grace, even though we can't do anything to earn it. Remember too, as we're pursuing mercy, mercy can sometimes it feels like works, like we're doing something, we're seeking something, and grace can too sometimes when we're trying to be gracious towards other people. So we also have to be careful to put it in the light of Ephesians 2 that talks about how it's not anything that we do. It's by grace that we're saved. It's through faith. It's not of ourselves. It's not by works, so that none of us can boast. Because if we could just go live our lives in gracious ways and in merciful ways, that would be good. Like, that would be better for this country and this world, but it wouldn't be enough to save us. It's only the grace of God that opens the door to salvation. And it's only through understanding what God has saved us from do we really understand what God has saved us to. And then beyond that, we think about grace. God has given us this grace that we don't deserve, that we can't earn. And through that, he's saved us from something that we did earn, that we do deserve. And God says, because you've been saved from this thing, and because you've been able to experience this relationship with me, now I want you to go to the red letters of Jesus, the Beatitudes. I want you to go and live your life in this way. And what happens? We experience another blessing. Every one of these Beatitudes is about how God blesses us. Every one of these statements is about, because you've accepted through faith this gift of salvation and you know what you're saved from, you'll want to live your life in a certain way, because that's what we should want to do when people do good things for us, not because we're earning our way into heaven, but because we understand that's God has a plan for us and he wants us to live our lives that way. And in doing so, we get another blessing from God. It's an unbelievably amazing system that God has created that blesses us more and more and more. And one of the ways that we can have a happy life is to live a life the way that God wants us to. So when we're understanding mercy, when God is saying, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy," we go, I want to experience God's blessing. And when I experience that blessing, I realize the joy that God has for me. So to have a happy life, your first note, this is number 5 in the series. If you were here for the past 2 weeks, you know the first 4, but it's to be merciful. It's to demonstrate mercy to other people. So what does that really look like? Well, I can't think of a better illustration than those of us who are parents of children. Because, man, our kids can do some stuff sometimes, right? My oldest turns 25 on Friday. My youngest is 22, and they're grown men now, kind of weirdly grown men, but it just feels weird to say, you know? But they are, and now the things that they do, they bring consequences on themselves. But there are still occasional times that they bring consequences on the family. They're still on our insurance, right? And they get tickets and my rates go up and that kind of stuff. And so there are still those things. But when I think about mercy as a parent, and if you're not a parent, you've been a child. There's been somebody in your life that served a parental role or an authority role, and you probably know what it feels like to let somebody down. We've all done it. It's not comfortable to think about, but we have. We do. And I hope that you know what it feels like for somebody to come alongside of you and go, "You let me down. You screwed up. And in doing so, these are the consequences that you've earned for yourself." However, let's chalk this one off to experience. Let's recognize that, yes, as parents, our job is, I'm not saying to never discipline your kids. That's our job. That's our charge. The Bible isn't contradictory, right? It's not saying always extend mercy in this way. But I think maybe even then it's saying sometimes, really every time, we should be meting out discipline in biblical ways, in merciful ways. It's not just a heavy-handed amount of punishment that we give our kids. Well, you broke a rule, so you experience this punishment right now to the full effect. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is come alongside your children and put your arm around them and go, I get it. I've screwed up too. I know what it's like to be imperfect. Has anybody ever experienced somebody withholding a consequence or a punishment or something from you? It's a powerful thing, isn't it? Here's what makes the mercy of Jesus Christ even that much more powerful. None of us are perfect. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. None of us are perfect, which means we have the luxury of operating in this system where there's no need for a perfect execution of these things. Meaning, if somebody does something to me that is deserving of some sort of retribution or consequence, and I decide I'm going to withhold that from you, it can end there. That punishment never needs to go anywhere else. I can choose to just withhold it, to not distribute it, and we move forward. But that's because I'm already imperfect. I've already sinned against other people in similar ways. But the system that God designed is a system where He's at the top and He's perfect, which means the punishment that comes from the system that God designed has to be applied somewhere. It has to. That's the system. So when we think about God's mercy towards us, we need to remember that it's not just God choosing to withhold that punishment from us. That's not all it is. God didn't just say, well, you sinned, and I'm going to forgive you for your sin, and that punishment goes nowhere. It doesn't. That's not the system that God created, because He's perfect, and it requires something different. So what did God do? God said, I'm going to occupy the form of man. A man named Jesus. And I'm going to step into this world. And the punishment that needs to be applied for the consequences of sin in all of our lives, I'm going to carry that on your behalf. God stepped down from heaven and punished Himself for our sin. So as powerful as it is for you and I to understand mercy when somebody withholds punishment for us, it's so much more powerful when someone pays that price on our behalf. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. If you want to have a happy life, begin to withhold punishment from people. Begin to see that you're right to feel angry, to feel betrayed, to feel wounded by somebody, and choose not to care. Choose to give it up. Choose to say, God, they've hurt me, and now I know a little bit about how you felt when I hurt you. God, help me to reach into their lives in the way like you've reached into mine. Help me to be merciful and to be gracious. So that's the first verse here. Verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. But the second verse, this is a whole lot more complicated verse for me. Thankfully, we still have time. I was worried. Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Purity is an interesting word. Purity is not a word that comes up in conversations for me often. Maybe it is for you. Maybe you work in a situation where that's an important thing. But I don't know. I would say purity is kind of an antiquated word. Not that it's not relevant or important, but it's not a word that I find comes up a lot in conversation. Maybe your situation is different. What kind of things, and go ahead and shout them out, what kind of things come to mind when I say the word purity? What? Cleansing. What else? Life? Your wife. Purity. It's a good one. Food? Spotless? Water. Yeah, a lot of clean water movements in the world. What else? Innocence. What? Refining metal. You're making it more pure, working out the impurities. Anything else? Virginity. Yeah, there's an element of sexuality. Anyone hear the purity movement? Right? What was True Love Waits? That was the the kind of original one. I had a friend, have a friend who ran an organization in town that was focused on biblical sexual integrity. And I remember once I was introducing him for an event and brought him up on stage. Said, "This is my friend Jason. He runs a purity ministry." And everybody clapped, and he came up and took the stage, and he said, "Thank you, Pete." He said, "It's actually not a purity ministry; it's a sexual integrity ministry." And then he started talking about it. But I knew in that moment, standing side stage, I'm like, "Oh, I kind of stuck my foot in my mouth here." I could just tell that I had said something that had resonated with him in a negative way. And so I grabbed him afterwards, and I said, "Hey, when I introduced you as the director of a purity-based organization, you said sexual integrity. Tell me what the difference is." And he said, we work with people who've been in all stages of sexual sin, either their own or somebody else perpetrated on them. And so when we experience something like that, when we work with people who've experienced these kind of things, we have to be careful the words that we use, because it's very, very difficult for people to ever see something that they heard was impure as pure again. Another illustration, a pastoral friend of mine once did, and he brought a kid on stage, and he had a cup full of dirt and a pitcher full of water. And he poured some water into this cup, right, until it was full to the top. And he asked the kid, "Would you drink this?" And it's floaters, and it's like runny mud, right? And the kid's like, "No, I'm not going to drink that." He's like, "Okay, hold on." And he pours out half of it, and he puts half fresh water in this. He said, "Okay, well, would you drink it now?" He's like, "Well, no." "Well, why not?" "Well, I know that it's still dirty. I can see that it's still dirty." And so he did it again and again. And you're going to drink it now? No. You're going to drink it now? No. Until he had done it 10 times. And if you do the math, that means that the dirt is occupying 1/1024th of the glass. So it's 1 part per 1,000 dirt to pure water. And he asked the kid, he's like, "Well, would you drink it now?" And he said, "No." So, "Well, why not?" He's like, "Well, because I know that it was dirty." And he said, "Well, what would it take for you to drink it?" He's like, "I don't know, like $5." So the lesson is, we all have a price. No. The point is, once we see something as unclean or impure, we have a really difficult time thinking about it in any other kind of idea. It's been broken. It's been damaged. It can't be repaired in a way to where it was never damaged before. And so I learned a lesson that day, introducing my friend about purity, and I never again talked about that organization as a purity organization. It was about biblical sexual integrity. But this verse, this "blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God," I even go beyond that, and I go, okay, well, even if we could reconcile this understanding of purity, which we'll talk more about, I'm not sure that I really want to see God. What I mean by that is, when I look in the Bible, when I look in the Old Testament, what happens to people who see God? They die, right? So I go, well, the blessing of being pure in heart is I get to see God. And does that mean that I'm going to fall over? Moses in Exodus 33, Moses said to God, "Show me your face." They were meeting in the tent of meeting, and he says, "Show me your face." And God's like, buddy, we're not going to do that, because you can't handle this. I'll walk by in the night, and you'll see my glory pass through, and you'll see my back. And what do we know about Moses? Moses' interactions with God still left him changed. He's lucky that he didn't die. He was different after, and different in kind of a weird way too. It's not always like when we go, "Oh, well, you're different after you meet with God." Well, yeah, sometimes, but sometimes you wrestle with God and you limp for the rest of your life, because that's an Old Testament story too. And as a wrestler, it's one of my favorites. Interactions with God can sometimes do damage. They can change you in a way that maybe you're not expecting. So when we say, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God," we first have to get past this idea of whether or not we want to see God at all. Assuming that we do. Assuming that we go, okay, I want to see God in the way that Moses and Isaac and Jacob and Abraham and the disciples and Paul, I want to see God in the way that those people saw God. Well, then we have to reconcile this whole issue of purity. Because if purity means perfection, suddenly I go, I'm not so sure I can ever be perfect. I know my imperfection. I know my sin. I know the stains on my life. I know the blemishes. And some of them are current and some of them are very old. And they all make me feel just as dirty sometimes. And I look at the rest of these statements of blessing here, and I can't help but think, like, I can do most of these. I can accomplish something in every one of these. I say, blessed are those who are poor in spirit. Yeah, I can recognize that there's nothing in my own spirit that can redeem myself. It's only through the Spirit of God that I experience being spiritually rich. Without the Spirit of God in my life, as it amounts to eternity, I'm poor. So I go, okay, I can experience that blessing because I understand it. Blessed are those who mourn. I know what it's like to mourn. We all probably know what it's like to mourn, to lose somebody, to need comfort in one way or another. So you go, I understand that. I can navigate towards this. I can wrestle through this. Blessed are the meek. As Jason shared, and if you were to dive into this even more, you'd recognize that doesn't mean that we are timid and we're a wallflower, we're shy, and we don't have power. That means we recognize that God has instilled power in every single one of us, and being meek means using it in service and in submission to God, in the direction that God wants us to go. That's what meek is. It's being humble and laying down our own desires and exchanging them for a pursuit of God. And I go, I may not always do that perfectly, but I can at least move that direction. I can stumble that way. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I go, yes, certainly at different times in my life, I do better at that than others, but this is something that I can accomplish, the direction that I can go. And then I get to this one. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I go, and I'm not so sure. Because my definition of pure is perfect, blameless, unblemished. Complicated even more, the way that the Israelites, the Jewish people spoke about heart was far greater than our understanding of heart. You know, it's not just a physical thing. And I would say in context, we do, maybe when we think about the heart, understand it a little bit grander. It's not just the thing that beats in our chest, but when we give Valentine's Day cards to people, we're expressing this kind of love that we have for them. When we talk about people who have a great amount of heart in their character, we're talking about the integrity that they have. That's a different kind of heart, but it's the same word. When we talk about people running a race and running hard or kind of burning out because they didn't have the heart, or people who give up or quit too early, we say their heart wasn't in it. Heart, in Jewish terms, and really a lot of how we use it today, it's physical and it's mental and it's emotional and it's spiritual. It's a holistic thing. So now when I break that verse down, verse 8, when I break it down differently, I see that it says that a blessing of God will go to the people who are perfect physically and spiritually and mentally and emotionally. And I go, 5 out of 6 blessings isn't so bad, because I'm probably not going to achieve that standard of perfection here. But then I fast forward to the end of chapter 5. And I read the very last verse in the chapter, verse 48. You know what it says? It says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. I don't believe that God gives us commissioning and commandments towards things that we can't accomplish. I don't believe that. I believe that when we read the Bible, when God tells us to do something, it's because we can. Now, the caveat is, we can't always do it on our own. Because if you hole up inside of yourself, completely separate from Jesus Christ, and you say, well, I'm going to work on a pursuit of perfection. I'm going to be physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually perfect. You will fail. Apart from God, this is not something that you can succeed in. But with God, it means that we need to change our understanding of purity and perfection. It doesn't mean that we hold on to this pursuit of perfection that never has any interruption, that never has a blemish. It's not a perfect, undefeated record. It's perfect from that point on. And what I know is that with God, all of these things that he calls me to are possible. All of these things that he tells me to do, I can do. I just have to tag him in. I have to say, hey, I can't do it on my own, but I want the blessing that you've promised to your people. So help me. I can't do it on my own. I need your help. So we invite God into that process, and he starts forming us into this perfect image of who he wants us to be. And it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've come from. It doesn't matter what you've been involved in. It doesn't matter what your life looked like before. I would say it doesn't matter what your life looks like that day when you got in your car. You woke up this morning and you went, okay, I got a day, I'm going to run around and I'm going to do some errands, and then I'm going to go to church tonight, and I'm going to try to have the most physically and spiritually and emotionally perfect day, intellectually perfect day. And so you set out on your day and you pulled up at wherever your local coffee shop is that you order from, and they made your drink wrong, and you had this horrible thought like, why can't I order from here all the time? Why can't they just get it right? And then you went, shoot, I was trying to be perfect today. I guess I got to try again tomorrow. In Lamentations chapter 3, it says, God's mercies are new every morning. See, this perfection thing goes back to this mercy thing. They build on one another. And when we fall down and when we experience mistakes, sin in our lives, when we fall short, we can start over that very moment. It can be difficult. That's why we need a community of people around us to be able to call and say, hey, still a sinner, could use your help. Can you help me through this situation that I'm going through? I made a mistake. That's why we have a God that is accessible all the time, that we can go to and we can say, I am not perfect, but I know that you are, and I know that with you one day I will be. So God, put me on that path towards perfection that you want me to walk, and pick me up when I fall down, because I want to experience that blessing reserved for the pure in heart. I do want to see God, and I want to begin to see myself the way that God sees me. It's a way more perfect vision than the one that we see staring back at us every day in the mirror. God's mercies are new every morning. I'd encourage you to read Lamentations 3 on your own. Maybe put that in your notes to check out later. And I want to close just with a prayer. I'd invite you guys to close your eyes and bow your heads. God, I pray that for every person in the room, we'd be eager to begin to see your mercy at work in our lives. And Lord, if we're people who understand your grace and we've already experienced your mercy, God, I pray that we would receive it tenfold more. And God, we give you thanks for this blessing that you give to us, that when we live in that space of grace that you've carved out for us, and when we see what you've saved us from and what you've saved us to, God, that we can't help but run in your direction, and you bless us anyway. God, we're so thankful for that. Lord, I pray that our imperfections don't last forever. I'm so thankful, God, that you can make us pure again, that you can make us the perfect version of perfection in the way that you want us to be perfect. And God, we may never achieve this human version of perfection here in this place, but Lord, we understand that you see through a different lens. God, let us begin to see ourselves and the people around us in a different way. Let us begin to see those people as your perfect creations on a path towards perfection in you. Strengthen us as we go, Lord. In your name, amen.